It is March 9th, 2026, and the relationship between Canada and the United States, two nations that have acted as closest friends, next-door neighbors, and close military allies for generations, is showing serious, very visible strain. Canada is openly resisting Washington over one of the most significant defense choices it has faced in modern times, and Donald Trump is reacting with considerable displeasure. The disagreement has now reached a critical level, and the language currently passing between Ottawa and Washington would have seemed completely unimaginable only a few years earlier. Today, we're going to unpack precisely what occurred, the reasons Canada took this stance, what Trump has said in response, and what these developments could mean for the future of continental defense in North America. Get ready. This situation has many dimensions. To make sense of the current tension, we have to step back to an organization called NORAD. A lot of people recognize the name, yet far fewer truly grasp what it does or why it carries such weight. NORAD stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. It was established in 1958 during the height of the Cold War. Back then, both the United States and Canada lived with the constant fear of a Soviet nuclear strike routed over the Arctic. Each country understood that protecting that enormous northern airspace was impossible for one nation alone. So they made an extraordinary decision. They chose to share responsibility. They created a fully integrated binational military headquarters, half American, half Canadian, that would monitor the skies jointly, identify potential threats together, and act together if danger approached the continent. The commander of NORAD has invariably been a U.S. four-star general, while the deputy commander has always been Canadian. The arrangement rests on mutual trust, shared geography, and the common recognition that the Arctic represents the continent's northern gateway. This framework has been renewed and modernized several times across the decades, and for over 60 years, it functioned exceptionally well until recently. Hit that subscribe button right now because you will not want to miss a single video I release on this. The situation is escalating by the hour. Here is the core issue that has been simmering for months and has now erupted into a genuine diplomatic confrontation. Canada requires new fighter aircraft. Its existing CF-18 Hornets are reaching the end of their service life, so the government must select the next platform. In 2021, Canada conducted a formal competition to pick its future fighter, and the American-made F-35 Lightning II, manufactured by Lockheed Martin, emerged victorious based on technical and operational criteria. The intention was to acquire 88 F-35s to update the Royal Canadian Air Force. But circumstances shifted. The political environment changed. A new administration led by Prime Minister Mark Carney took office. Against the backdrop of an intensifying trade conflict with the United States and growing anti-American feeling among Canadian voters, serious discussion began about possibly revisiting the F-35 commitment. Canadian lawmakers and defense analysts turned their attention toward an alternative: the Swedish-designed Saab Gripen fighter. The Gripen had participated in the original evaluation, and although it fell short of the F-35 in strictly military metrics, it offered compelling advantages for Canada. Saab proposed constructing production facilities in Ontario and Quebec, promising roughly 12,600 Canadian jobs, and granting Canada far greater autonomy over its aircraft instead of relying heavily on U.S. supply lines. Surveys indicated that around 43% of Canadians favored selecting the Gripen directly, while another 29% preferred a combined fleet. Combined, nearly 7 out of 10 Canadians expressed unease about committing entirely to the F-35. That represents a powerful political message, and the Carney government was paying close attention. Washington picked up on the shift immediately, and the Trump administration reacted quickly, sharply, and, in the eyes of many, intimidatingly. In late January 2026, U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hucksra appeared on CBC News, Canada's public broadcaster, and issued a statement that reverberated across Canadian defense and policy communities. He declared, those were his exact words, that NORAD would need to be modified if Canada walked away from purchasing all 88 F-35s. Pause and consider the implication. The American ambassador was effectively informing Ottawa, if you refuse our jets, We will alter the arrangement that has safeguarded your airspace for 67 years. Hoekstra went on to argue that selecting what he termed an inferior platform, the Gripen, would weaken the collective defense posture of North America, forcing Washington to determine how to compensate for the shortfall. He strongly suggested that U.S. fighters would need to patrol Canadian airspace much more regularly to cover any resulting vulnerabilities. In plain terms, your territory, but our aircraft operating over it routinely and without your complete authority. To Canadians, that did not sound like a mere policy difference. It felt like coercion. Smash that like button right now if this is making sense so far. And this is precisely why Canada is so upset. There is important context. NORAD already functions under a straightforward principle. The nearest available aircraft responds, regardless of which country it belongs to. American fighters have therefore previously entered Canadian airspace to handle real incidents. One example involved a bomb threat on a German passenger plane near Calgary. Another occurred in early 2023 when a mysterious balloon crossed into Yukon territory and was destroyed by an American jet. In both instances, the system worked smoothly because it rested on reciprocal respect and mutual consent. But what Ambassador Hoekstra outlined was fundamentally different. He described turning that kind of U.S. military activity inside Canadian airspace into standard practice. Not because Canada requested assistance, but because Washington judged Canada deficient in military contribution. That changes the nature of the relationship entirely. That is no longer partnership. To a large number of Canadians, it begins to resemble occupation. Canadian defense specialists responded to Hoekstra's comments with concern and sharp rebuke. Andrea Sharon, director of the Centre for Defense and Security Studies at the University of Manitoba and one of Canada's foremost NORAD authorities, cautioned that this style of open pressure actually strengthens adversaries rather than allies. She stated plainly that loud public disputes and threats among partners erode the strength of collective deterrence. In other words, when the U.S. and Canada argue visibly on the global stage, Russia and China pay attention. Vincent Rigby, former national security advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and a veteran of more than 3 decades in Canadian foreign and defense affairs, characterized Hoekstra's statements as a blunt political maneuver. This is simply another spontaneous comment from the ambassador, Rigby told the press. It cannot be dismissed, yet it should not be treated as official policy from either the White House or the Pentagon. The consistent view from Canada's defense establishment was clear. Washington is attempting to strong-arm Canada into a specific arms purchase, and such conduct jeopardizes the alliance itself. Then the situation grew even more complex because Canada was not only wrestling with the F-35 question, it was simultaneously facing a separate, ambitious new U.S. defense project known as the Golden Dome. The Trump administration had advanced a large-scale missile defense architecture designed, in theory, to intercept ballistic missiles targeting North America. The system depends on extensive radar coverage and sensor networks spread across the northern reaches of the continent. And here lies the critical point. Canada's geography is indispensable. As retired U.S. 4-star General Glenn Van Herk, former NORAD commander, explained directly, the most valuable asset they provide is simply their landmass. The most direct path any missile would take from Russia, China, or North Korea toward the continental United States passes straight over the North Pole and through Canadian airspace. Without Canadian cooperation, the Golden Dome would contain a glaring northern vulnerability. Canada possesses irreplaceable geographic leverage, but Canada was not prepared to surrender that leverage without conditions, especially not while the Trump administration imposed tariffs on Canadian exports and challenged the nation's economic independence. Canada's formal stance on the Golden Dome, as articulated by the Department of National Defense, remained careful and contingent. A spokesperson informed the defense publication Breaking Defense, "Discussions are continuing, and we will participate only if the arrangement benefits both sides." Read that once more. Canada neither agreed nor refused. Canada signaled it would engage only on equitable terms. That is classic bargaining language. That is Canada informing Washington. We understand our value. We understand your requirements. and you will need to treat us as a genuine partner if you expect our involvement. Now, Donald Trump himself steps directly into the spotlight, and the temperature rises rapidly. Trump, never shy about voicing opinions on Canada, expressed his irritation publicly and in his distinctive style. He had already spent weeks intensifying pressure on Canada, insisting it raise defense spending to meet the NATO 2% GDP guideline, urging completion of the F-35 purchase, and openly stating that Canada was not doing enough for its own protection. When reports surfaced of Canada's ongoing reluctance regarding the jets, and when Ottawa signaled it was genuinely weighing inclusion of the Swedish Gripen, Trump's response was intense. He condemned the possible choice as disloyalty to the alliance. He contended that opting for a non-American fighter was not merely a procurement decision. It represented a political rejection of the United States precisely when, in his opinion, Canada was already creating difficulties through trade friction and tariff disputes. Trump delivered his view in the straightforward, deal-oriented language he favors. If Canada won't purchase American products, Canada cannot expect American protection. His advisors reinforced the point forcefully, with administration figures indicating that Canada appeared to be pursuing defense independence at the very moment it was clashing with Washington economically, and that Washington would not forget. For a great many Canadians, Trump's approach produced the reverse of the intended outcome. Instead of frightening Ottawa into compliance, the forceful tactics from Washington stiffened domestic opposition to the F-35 contract. When voters watch an American president dictate which weapons their country should acquire in language that feels more threatening than cooperative, the instinctive reaction is patriotic. Canadians began warming to the notion of purchasing Swedish jets and generating domestic employment exactly because it represented a form of resistance to perceived American overreach. The Carney government, already framing itself as a protector of Canadian independence amid Trump's economic pressure, discovered that the fighter controversy was resonating strongly at home. Appearing to stand firm against Washington had become politically advantageous in Canada in early 2026, in a way it had not been for a long time. There is also a wider strategic context worth noting. Canada is not the only nation beginning to reconsider its reliance on American military equipment. Denmark, a NATO partner that acquired F-35s and stationed them in Greenland, partly in reaction to Trump's earlier suggestions about acquiring the Arctic territory, was publicly voicing regret over that decision by early 2026. The chair of Denmark's Parliamentary Defense Committee acknowledged second thoughts about the F-35 commitment, but conceded Denmark now had no practical alternative since those jets constituted its entire active fighter force. He offered Canada a direct recommendation: select a different fighter. Advice of that nature coming from a NATO ally already fully committed to the F-35 and now effectively locked in was striking. It demonstrated that Canada was not alone among Western partners in reevaluating dependence on U.S. defense supply chains during the Trump period. The central question now is what comes next, and here is what observers are tracking carefully. Canada has pledged roughly $28.3 billion over the coming 2 decades to upgrade NORAD, including construction of new Arctic radar installations in Ontario, scheduled to become operational by 2029. That level of investment demonstrates clearly that Canada has zero intention of abandoning the core defense relationship with the United States. Canada has always recognized that its geographic position permanently links its security to American security. No amount of political frustration alters the reality that Russia and China monitor the Arctic continuously. Yet what Canada is pursuing at present is subtler and more consequential than simply exiting NORAD. It is attempting to renegotiate the conditions of the partnership. It is declaring, "We remain fully committed to continental defense, but we will decide independently which aircraft we operate. And you cannot coerce us by threatening to revise an agreement that has safeguarded both nations for 67 years." That represents a meaningful evolution in how Canada perceives its role relative to the United States, an evolution that has been gradually taking shape under the influence of Trump-era transactional diplomacy. The risks are enormous. Should Canada proceed with acquiring Gripen aircraft either alongside or in place of F-35s, genuine interoperability difficulties for NORAD will arise. The two platforms employ distinct communication protocols, different data sharing systems, and separate maintenance needs. Operating a mixed or non-compatible fleet would necessitate real adjustments to NORAD procedures. Military analyst Justin Massey from Université du Québec à Montréal posed a sharp question. Would Washington even permit complete integration of the Gripen into NORAD networks, given how closely the two countries' air defense architectures are linked? In practical terms, Canada might select the Gripen on contract documents, only to discover it remains reliant on American consent to make the system function effectively. That is the difficult position Canada occupies, a position created not by Canadian vulnerability, but by decades of profound military integration with the United States. What is unfolding between Canada and the United States transcends a single aircraft deal. It concerns sovereignty, economic influence, and the meaning of being the junior member of an alliance when the senior member begins behaving more like a property owner than a partner. Canada did not initiate this dispute. Canada was maneuvered into this position through tariffs, through threats against Canadian territory, and through an American ambassador instructing Ottawa which weapons it could purchase. The Canadian response has been restrained yet unmistakable. Canada will exercise its own judgment. And that message, delivered on March 8, 2026, is being heard not only in Washington, but by nations worldwide that are observing how mid-sized democracies respond to an increasingly assertive American foreign policy under Donald Trump. The coming months will be decisive. The Carney government must reach a final decision on the fighter contract. NORAD modernization talks will proceed. Golden Dome negotiations will either advance or falter. Throughout it all, one question looms over every development. Can Canada and the United States restore a relationship that once again feels like genuine partnership? Or are we witnessing the early stages of a deeper, more enduring division between two countries that have been each other's most reliable allies for more than a century? We are going to follow this story closely and report every significant update as it emerges. If you found this explanation helpful and want to stay informed on stories like this, please do us a big favor. Hit that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button so you never miss a video. We're analyzing the world's most important geopolitical developments in a way that actually makes them understandable. Your support allows us to keep doing exactly that. Drop a comment below and let us know. Do you believe Canada is making the smart move by standing up to Washington, or is this a risky bet that could weaken North American security? We read every comment. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.